we have a solar storm train of 7 solar storms on their way to Earth, with the promise of lots of aurora and a reminder of the importance of space weather. Those stories and more in this week's Spotlight. Space weather this week remains in high activity mode. As we take a look at our Earth-facing disk, we had been paying attention to region 3663. This had been the big X-flare player. Earlier in the week, it had been firing lots of different X-class flares and other big flares, but it had not been giving us any Earth-directed solar storms. However, as we watched region 3664 and 3668, once they crossed center disk, right around where that hot longitude was, as expected, they started to grow. In fact, region 3664 began to merge with region 3668 late on the 7th and into the 8th, and that is when all the fireworks really began to start. In fact, right about the 8th, you see this region right in here began to fire off a solar storm, and then it fired off another solar storm back to back right here. Those were 2 storms, and then it launched one more storm right here. And if we take a look in coronagraphs, you can actually see the first solar storm right here. This is the one that's going mainly southwest of Earth, but that's still partly Earth-directed. So that's storm 1. Then shortly after that, right on its tail, you see a big halo. This is a totally Earth-directed solar storm. That was the first big X-class flare from region 3664. And then shortly thereafter, we had yet another halo. Bam! Right there. That is now storm number 3 that's headed toward Earth. And yet this region was not done. As it continued to move, we actually got more activity from it, but not before it fires off a filament right here off to the west, slightly northwest of Earth. But at this nearly the same time, we got yet another big flare from this region. So we have yet another 1-2 from solar storms, and then we had a short one that came after that as well. But take a look in coronagraphs. Here is the partial halo from this filament eruption that's going mainly to the east of Earth. So what is that? Storm number 4 now. And then shortly thereafter, look, there's another big halo. So that is now storm number 5. But we're still not done. In fact, as we continue this ride, you'll actually see the part of that filament or part of that eruption pop off right there. Now, as we move into the 9th, we're going to have yet 2 more big solar storms. We have a big X-class flare coming up right about here. Bam! Right there. That's a big X-class flare. And with that, we have yet another big halo. This is storm number 6. So if you keep them counting, we've got a ton of solar storms all being rapid fired at Earth. And then shortly thereafter, as this region rotates a little bit further to the west limb, you see yet a bam right there, another solar storm launch. And this one has yet another halo. You can see it. It looks like we're finally getting to a point where this region's going to be rotating basically out of the Earth strike zone here soon. So hopefully that's just 7 solar storms. We're not going to get any more Earth-directed solar storms from this region. Can't promise that, but there'll be more flanking blows rather than big direct hits. Now, thank goodness for that, but despite that, we still have other regions on the east limb. If you recall, we have some far-sighted regions that are going to be rotating into Earth view. In fact, as we take a look at our JSOC HMI helioseismology far-sighted viewer, do you guys remember regions 3645, 3654, and region 3644 and 48. These are regions that were giving us big solar flares about 2 weeks ago, and they have all survived their far-sighted passage. You can see in the gold here, this is the far side of the sun, and they're about to rotate back into Earth view. The dark regions show where those sunspot clusters are. So get ready, because we're going to be having possibly more activity to returning into Earth view, giving us more big solar flares and possibly the chance for big solar storms again. So even with region 3664 going off of the east or the west limb, we're still going to be having quite a bit of activity. So Aurora photographers, get ready, and amateur radio operators and emergency responders, expect that you're going to still have issues on Earth's dayside with those big radio bands, because those big solar flares just aren't going away. Now, taking a closer look at regions 3664 and region 3668, we haven't seen sunspot clusters like this in quite some time. Now, as we watch these regions rotate across the disk, you can see a blow up of them here in the inset. And as they pass through this hot longitude that was right about center disk, as expected, things started to change. In fact, you can watch this new growth emerging right here between region 3664 and 3668. And by about the 8th, this region had really kind of fused together in this really magnetically complex region. And this is right about when region 3664 began to take over. You can see lots of flare activity. This is when we started getting the big solar storm launches, as well as the big solar flares, including big radio bursts up into the gigahertz range. And this is likely going to continue because this region is showing no signs of slowing down. In fact, even as we get to late on the 9th, you can still see a ton of complexity in this region. It is still firing off solar flares as well as solar storms. So this region is likely going to survive its far side passage. It's also likely going to be shooting off solar flares and solar storms on the sun's far side. And in about 2 weeks, we could very well easily see it again. And it may still be a big solar storm and solar flare producer. So we're going to be keeping our eyes on it. And amateur radio operators, emergency responders, and even you aviators, this region is definitely one that you got to keep your eyes on. And if the look of that active region cluster did not get your attention, this surely will. This is our M-flare Dayside radio blackout threat meter. And look at this thing. As we move in, you see all these different flares. Big M flares, big X-class flares. This is from region 3663. But as we move into the 8th, this is right when region 3664 began to take over. And look at the noise floor for the X-ray flux. It has climbed so high that the noise floor is sitting at the M flare level. This is at an R1 radio blackout level. This is without solar flares. So you amateur radio operators on Earth's Dayside, if you're wondering why you can't get anything on the Dayside radio bands, this is why. Our noise level is sitting at an R1 level radio blackout. We have popped either at or very near the R3 level radio blackout threshold at least 7 times in the last 48 hours, topping it off especially with an X4.5 flare. And this is the flare that actually caused a radio blackout and with a huge radio burst in it that had a ton of energy in the VHF range. So you aviators, this could definitely affect your backup radio communications, especially if you're flying over the poles. And it also had energy up in the 800 to 1 gigahertz range, and that becomes really close to those ADS-B transponders as well as to GPS and GNSS receivers. So amateur radio operators as well as aviators and anyone using GPS, if you're on Earth's Dayside, you definitely could be affected by this. So you're going to have to deal with it over the next 36 to 48 hours before this region begins to rotate to the sun's far side, and hopefully these types of radio bursts will begin to go away. And now returning to those Earth-directed solar storms, in order to get better details on which storms are going to be direct hits and which ones are flanking blows, we take advantage of the full view of the SOHO-LASCO coronagraph as it's viewed from Earth. And you can see that first solar storm, this is the one that was launched mainly southwest of Earth, but on its heels will be a full halo that goes all the way around the sun. That will be solar storm 2. You'll see it, boom, right there. This is the full halo. That is storm number 2. This storm was the one that was launched with the very first X-class flare from region 3664 and kind of really set the gears in motion. Shortly after that, we get yet another halo. You can see that right there. That is solar storm number 3. So that's the second halo that's going to be a direct hit at Earth. Then shortly thereafter, we get that filament launch. This is storm number 4. It's mainly going northeast of Earth. But right after that, you'll see yet another halo. This is storm number 5. And that means it's the third halo, the third solar storm that's going to be a direct hit, or looks like it's going to be a direct hit at Earth, and it's going to be very impactful. Then it's followed by that solar storm launched during the X4.5 flare. This was probably the strongest of the bunch, and this one looks also like it's going to be a direct hit. So this is now storm number 4 that is a direct hit at Earth, but a total of 6 storms thus far. And then we finally get the caboose, boom, right there. This is storm number 7. You can see it's no longer kind of it's what we call an asymmetric halo. It looks like it's a bit on the weak side. So luckily, it seems like this one will be a bit of a weaker punch. And it also shows that region 3664 is now rotating out of the Earth's strike zone. So hopefully this will be the last of the storms we'll have to deal with before this region rotates to the sun's far side. Now, as we take a look at our solar storm prediction model, NLL, this is NOAA's version of the model. The top panel's density, the bottom panel's velocity, and you're looking down at the sun from the North Pole with Earth being off to the right. And you're going to see 4 solar storms that are launched in this version of this run. These 4 storms are the 4 halos, the 4 direct, what we consider direct hits, back to back to back to back. And hopefully you can see them as I set this in motion. Now, as you watch them coming out, I'll stop them right here. They're already beginning to merge in this model. And this is where we have to be very careful, because this model doesn't take into account how the magnetic field of these solar storms really interacts with each other. These storms are not merging into one big storm, even though the model shows it will. We couldn't run the model faster than real time if we had to really include all of the real life details. So we do the best we can. As you see these storms merging into a single storm, you need to take this with a grain of salt, because these storms really are just going to be coming back to back to back. They're going to compress each other, but they're not going to merge into a single storm. So as we take a look at the impact time, NOAA is expecting the storms to arrive either late on the 10th or early into the 11th. And you see most of the storming will be done on the 11th, but likely because these storms don't really merge, they're going to be spread out, and we're probably going to get some storming into the 12th, possibly even into the 13th before things calm down. Now, as we switch to our NASA version of the model, again, you're looking down at the sun from the North Pole with Earth being off to the right. You're seeing those same 4 big halo storms being modeled here. And as they come out, once again, you see them beginning to merge. This is not what the storms will actually do. They're just going to compress each other quite a bit, but they are going to be individual storms, just all compressed together. NASA shows the initial impact will be a little bit earlier than what NOAA is predicting. That is on the evening of the 10th. Likely things again are going to start really ramping up on the 11th, however, and the storming will continue easily into the 12th and into the 13th before things calm down. So Aurora photographers, it doesn't matter where you are. If the magnetic field is oriented the right way, you're going to get to see some decent aurora deep into mid-latitude, so definitely keep your batteries charged. Switching to our moon, we are now coming out of a new moon on our way to a first quarter. And by the 15th, the moon will be about 50% illuminated. So you night sky watchers, if you want to catch those dim objects in the sky, and I don't know, maybe some aurora, well, now is your perfect chance. Now, switching to our solar storm conditions and aurora possibilities over the coming week, we are anticipating that train of solar storms that's on its way to Earth. It should hit basically starting around the 11th. So it should be no surprise that we're going to be storming in through the weekend and possibly into the early part of next week before things calm down. At high latitudes, NOAA's expecting severe storm conditions. In fact, they have about a 90% chance of severe storm conditions at a G4 level. And this is going to continue in through the 12th. Likely things will begin to calm down a little bit. We could see G3 levels on the 12th, and then things will continue to calm down as we move into early next week. Aurora photographers, if you're at high latitudes, of course you could get aurora if that magnetic field is oriented the right way. In fact, you might even have to look southward for the aurora. But for those of you who are concerned about the resilience of our power grids and you want to help, you can voluntarily turn down your power consumption, especially once the sun goes down, because that's when those big currents end up becoming a problem for us is at nighttime. So it gives the power utility companies a little bit more leeway to handle some of those currents from that big solar storm that's hitting. And don't worry at all about aurora if you're seeing them overhead. That is just our Earth kind of blowing off steam and dissipating the energy from these solar storms. It's completely normal. Now, as we switch to mid-latitude, well, we are still looking at solar storm conditions. In fact, we are still expecting severe storm conditions, but this time we're going to expect a G4 level, but only about a 50% chance of hitting a G4 level. Then we're going to bump down to likely major storm conditions, but we still have about a 25% chance of a severe storm on the 12th. And again, things will calm down shortly after that. So aurora photographers, if you're at mid-latitudes, yes, absolutely, you could get some aurora. Likely not as many issues when it comes to power consumption, but still the same thing goes for those of you at mid-latitudes. If you'd like to like to help during periods like this, especially if the storming continues over a long period of time, like 24 to 48 hours at these high levels, then yes, if you would like to voluntarily reduce your power consumption at night, I'm sure the power companies will thank you. And now switching to our solar flare and Dayside radio blackout outlook over the coming week, we are sitting around the mid 200s for solar flux, and this is mainly because of region 3664 that is going to be rotating to the sun's west limb in about 3 days, but likely the solar flux is going to stay above 200 because we're going to have new regions rotating into Earth view. Nonetheless, over the next 3 days, we're expecting to have severe noise on the radio bands. This is because we have about a 95% chance of M-class flares. This is at the R1 to R2 level radio blackout, and we have even up to about a 50% chance of X-class flares at an R3 level radio blackout. Over the next 3 days, you'll notice that we'll begin to die down a little bit as we move into the early part of next week. The noise will begin to go down to the moderate range. Thank goodness for that. That's because region 3664 will finally be disappearing from sight. So amateur radio operators and emergency responders and you aviators, well, just kind of hang in there over the next couple days and things will get better on the Dayside radio bands. And you GPS users also stay vigilant, especially near dawn and near dusk. And now switching to our radiation storm and polar aviation outlook over the coming week, we are sitting at D1 normal range right now. This is at flight level 360 for you aviators. It's also the S0 level, but our radiation storm levels are a bit elevated right now. And this is because we have that big solar storm train of events that are on their way to Earth. Likely this bit of solar storm radiation will rise a little bit. We could even see the D2 minor range right around the 11th when the storms hit, and that might even bump us up to the S1 level for a radiation storm. We have about a 50% chance, that's what NOAA's giving us, about a 50% chance of an S1 to S2 level radiation storm over the course of the 11th, but then things will likely begin to calm back down as these solar storms wash over us and begin to clear out. So you aviators and flight crew and you high-risk passengers as well as you frequent flyers, please take this into consideration in your flight plans. And you aviators also be sure to check those ICAO advisories often because these conditions can change quite quickly. So the space weather this week is extremely active. We have 7 Earth-directed solar storms that should be hitting us starting late on the 10th, early into the 11th, and could definitely bring aurora deep into mid-latitudes and cause extended storming, possibly at the G4 level. So aurora photographers, you're definitely going to get a show if that magnetic field orientation is the right way. And don't be concerned if you see aurora overhead. This is just our Earth dissipating that energy from that solar storm. It is completely normal. But for those of you who wish that you could help and don't really know how to, well, just turn down your power consumption over the course of the evening hours because that will actually give the utility companies a little bit more relief so that they can weather the storm just like everybody else. And now you amateur radio operators and emergency responders, well, right now things are really tough on Earth's Dayside. We are sitting at a very severe noise level, and that's because of region 3664 firing off just a slew of flares. and radio bursts, even at high levels up to the gigahertz range. So just hang in there, because this region will be disappearing in about 3 days, and likely that noise floor is going to drop quite a bit, and you'll just be like, thank goodness. But for those of you who are working the disaster areas and the tornado watches, just understand that the day side may not be the best place to work, so you can work on the night side until those solar storms hit. But when the solar storms hit, the night side's not going to be much better either. So you're really going to need to pay close attention to the space weather and try to work as best as you can. And now you GPS users, same thing. If you're doing search and rescue, just realize your GPS reception may not be all that good either on Earth's day side or on the night side, even especially when those solar storms come, especially near Aurora. So be very vigilant and careful as you fly, and also remember to calibrate your magnetometers often. I'm Tamitha, the Space Weather Woman. Thank you for watching.